I'm really glad you guys came out today. I, as he mentioned, am an educator, and typically educators lecture and theoretically are supposed to like lecture. My students will tell you that I'm much more of a participatory instructor. I like to have participation, I like to have conversation, hence brave conversations. So I expect participation here. I expect this just to be a visit and a conversation between us more than me standing here and lecturing to you, because most of what I have here I think you probably could go find yourself. It's just about putting it in a safe zone where we can have those kinds of conversations, and I hope we can do that. So understand that I may look to you, I may ask you questions, and I'll stand here until you answer them. So that's where we're going to go, and that's what's going to happen. So let's get into it. I was asked to make sure that you guys had some takeaways. So these are the three big takeaways out of it. One, be prepared. And yes, that harkens back to my days of scouting. I am and always will be an Eagle Scout. We hang on the be prepared. And specifically for this topic, be prepared is really all about understanding where you are and where you're going and what you should be doing. As a second one, it's understanding. We're going to unpack that a little bit and drill down into it and really prepare you with some information that will provide an opportunity for you to have brave conversations around this topic that is kind of very pervasive right now. A lot of people, it's in the news all the time, regardless of what news you listen to, and I'm hopefully going to have some information for you that will allow you to have conversations about that with folks in your office, folks around your coffee machine, folks in any social network that you're in, just an opportunity to really get into it, okay? And then last, who are you? I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who I am and hopefully kind of set up a platform for you to think about who you are and why that's important, relevant to this particular conversation, okay? Good? Yes? Good, okay. Diversity. Typically, what do you think of when you think of diversity? Ethnicity, yes. See, look at that. You could have just read that. I mean, there's 4 examples up there right now. So, I mean, I think typically when people say diversity, they think of ethnic diversity. But that is a very small slice of what we want to think of, what we want to talk about, what we want to engage in when we talk about diversity. Diversity of thought, diversity of faith, diversity of personality. I mean, diversity really encompasses everything that we as people are, everything that our world and our environment is. And if we exclude any portion of that, then we're not really having a full, vibrant, brave conversation. So diversity can be and is and should be anything and everything. Anything we want to talk about, because diversity really brings in all of those components. Yes? Yes? Yes. There we go. All right. Okay. See, that wasn't that hard, was it? See? Okay. So when we look at diversity, I don't know if you guys noticed, the pictures changed a little bit. So we went from an all black and white to multiple colors, and we back to black and white. Just wanted to kind of really give you a visual picture of what diversity, how diversity can change, and then what it can change back to if we don't engage in these kinds of conversations, if we don't have these brave conversations that bring in all of these facets of diversity. I think we want to make sure we do that. Okay? Let's expand our borders a little bit. I teach a class in diversity leadership, and this is one of the key components of that, is really looking at where people come from when you talk about that ethnic diversity, and really broadening our understanding. You remember, understanding is one of your key points. So broadening our understanding of what ethnic diversity looks like. Obviously, this is not everything. This is just a slice of when we talk about a particular ethnic group. A lot of times I think my students have been surprised, and I think you would be surprised, where those groups are kind of based, where we think they come from. Obviously, this is not everyone, but this is just a slice for you to think about. Again, broadening your horizons, broadening what you consider to be ethnic diversity, and really broadening what we should think about when we say diversity, okay? Good. Are we familiar with the term that diversity is good for business? Have we heard that? Have we read it? We heard people talk about it? I would submit that maybe it might be time to retire that. Only from the standpoint that sometimes people say if you're that the high nail gets knocked down, and that the sore thumb that gets stuck out is the one that gets cut off. I think we need to just understand, or at least entertain, that it's not that diversity is good for business, diversity is business. And I think that's what we want to think about, a different perspective of how we want to think about it. You know, one of the greatest opportunities when we have a diverse workspace and a diverse workforce is the opportunity to look at various answers for some very common kinds of problems. Obviously, with people with various backgrounds, various educational levels, various interest levels are going to attack problems differently, are going to bring different kinds of solutions to the table. If we exclude any of that, then we're just limiting ourselves. I typically like to say to folks when we start talking about diversity is, I like to say anybody who's walking the planet or sucking air needs to be included in the conversation. And that's everybody. And I think it's really important for business to engage in that kind of broadening, to engage in that kind of embracement of everybody should be at the table. Everybody is not just shouldn't be just invited to the table. Everybody should be included in the table. Okay? Yes? Yes. Good. When we talk about marketing, obviously that's what we're all marketers at some level or another. Typically, marketing is a customer-centric business. Does that make sense? Will we say we agree with that? Yes? So if marketing, thank you. Excellent. See, some people are trainable. That's good. The rest of you guys have a little opportunity to come along. Some people are, pick up earlier than others. If marketing is a customer-centric business, if we are concerned about and focused on and pointed toward our customers, don't we want to expand that as wide as possible, create an opportunity for any and everybody to participate in that element as a customer? I think anytime we don't fold and broaden our opportunities for everybody, we're limiting ourselves. And in business, that really is not, for most businesses, I really can't think of one off the top of my head that would want to limit their business. We don't want to exclude anyone because we don't know who or what their opportunity might be or why they may be interested in this. So by expanding those horizons, by creating a customer-centric opportunity, we just present ourselves with a much broader base to pull from. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay, good. So research from the Center of, I want to make sure I get this right, the Center for Multicultural Science indicates that marketing with cultural insights allows their customers to make a difference in how they interact with that business, how they interact with what the business has to offer, and how they engage in being a customer of that business. So if we focus on the opportunities that exist within multiculturalism, if we focus on the opportunity of diversity and inclusion, we do nothing but create a much larger opportunity for ourselves to be successful in business. Okay? Let's see if that pans out if we look at spending. So we look at the digital marketing. Digital marketing is where we're going. So we look at digital marketing spending for 2018 based on ethnic groups. You've got Asians at 5.8% of the population in 2017 and digital spending at 6.6%. African Americans, black folks at 13.4% population, spending at 12.1%. Latinos at 18.1% population, spending at 14.3%. And just all non-white groups, you lump everybody together, at 60.7%, but yet spending is 65%. So it's not way off, but it is off a little bit. Any reaction to that? Do we know what we're looking at here? Yes. Participatory again. I'm sorry, someone said?
What channels are for that? Is that?
I'm sorry, speak up.
Like, what is that? Is that like pay-per-click?
See, so you don't know what you're looking at. You got to ask. Okay. So this is, if you look at the spending against digital marketing for 2018, this is the amount of money that was spent against these specific ethnic groups in 2018. So the question was, are we spending relative to that particular ethnic group's population? And by and large, we are, which is pretty good for us. I think that's bodes well for us as marketers. The only one that's a little bit off, or quite a bit off, should I say, is down here is non-whites. Only having 60% of the population, but we're actually spending 65% against that. Now, that could be that a lot of marketing just goes out to the general consumer market as opposed to any particular specific ethnic market, but I still think we can do some balancing there. By drilling down a little bit, getting a little bit more granular on it, really trying to understand who we're speaking to and what that opportunity is, we can be more efficient in our spending. That's really all we're trying to say here, okay? So pay attention to that as you prepare digital marketing for your customers, your clients, whatever you want to call them. Pay attention to where your dollars are going and how you're allocating that, particularly if you're trying to speak to a particular ethnic market, okay? Nothing wrong with, I want to be clear, from my perspective as an ethnic, nothing wrong with speaking to a particular market space because not everybody's the same, and by speaking in a language that's relevant to them, that's both languages and language itself, but also what's important to them and how they look at life, but speaking it to something that's relevant to them, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. They find it, we find it more productive because one of the challenges that we have in marketing is folks look at marketing and don't see anybody who looks like them or sounds like them. And so the assumption is then I'm going to just wrap them into the general consumer market. I'm going to speak to them in the same way that I speak to the general consumer market, and they'll just come along. And it's really a huge mistake. And many of the largest marketers in the country have realized that as we have shifted from traditional marketing to digital marketing, it seems like that the shift is also coming along. But I still think we have a little bit of work to do because it's really off, not a lot, but it's off a little bit, particularly in the Latino market and the non-white market. Okay? That's what this is saying. Yes, sir?
You keep calling the bottom bar the non-white. You mean, that's white, isn't it? Am I?
Well, the way I interpreted the data is they broke out African Americans, they broke out black folks, they broke out Latinos, excuse me, I'm sorry, and they broke out Asians, so that left everybody else. So yes, white would be included in that. They just chose to call it non-white. I'm not really sure why.
Okay.
I think non-Latino.
That's what I thought too, is that meant.
Oh, you know what? That is an L, isn't it? Oh my gosh, look at that. That's non-Latino white. Yeah, thank you. See, you want to do this? Okay. Yeah, okay. But the main point here is that I wanted to make is that the spending is off a little bit. That's the point here is that I think we need to equalize, as marketers, we want to try and equalize our spending against whichever particular market space we want to go against, okay?
Do you know if these numbers are reflecting ads that are targeting those ethnicities, or is it a specific spin with something like a Latino podcast?
I think it's probably both. So it's both creative that's specifically directed at that audience by folks who are in the commercials or platforms that particular audience chooses to use. Because interestingly enough, if you drill down into this into the research a little bit more, particular platforms are favored by particular ethnic groups. So if I remember correctly, the Asian market has a tendency to use Twitter a little bit more than does African Americans or Hispanics. So it's a combination of all those things. It's how creative is put together. It's when we use specific language that's relevant to that particular ethnic group, and then it's what platform it's most of the dollars are put on that relate to or seem to be that's where that particular ethnic group does most of their activity. Okay, it's a great question. Thank you. So what have you discovered in any of your particular? Does anybody do any particular ethnic marketing? None. Some.
I haven't.
Okay.
I temporarily did some social media for medical clients, and that covers all people.
Okay.
But I did.
Do you say old or all?
All people.
Oh, no, old people are okay. That's fine. That's a group. I'm an old person. I take that. Okay.
But I did notice that when you look for, and it's come a long way, but stock photos are predominantly Caucasian people, especially if you're going into cosmetic or beauty sectors. Like, it was very difficult to find the same types of pictures and the quality of photos in any ethnic diversity.
Okay.
Caucasians.
So how did you guys handle that?
Oh, I just kept looking. I'll find a picture.
Thought you were gonna say I went out and shot my own because I couldn't find what I wanted in a stock photo. Okay.
Oh, no. If you get enough platforms, you can find stuff, and I really tried to make sure that we could regulate it. We did have Spanish-speaking. A lot of hospitals have Spanish-speaking facilities.
Right.
It's not always clear. And I'm like, if you don't have any pictures of this, then how are people going to know?
So even though you may have an ad or a piece directed at the Hispanic market in Spanish language, but doesn't have what we would classically think of as Hispanic-looking folks in it, do we think that's as effective, or was it? Did you guys find it to be as effective?
Oh, no. I mean, I would find images that would match, but it didn't, like, the quantity and quality of ethnic photos was not the same.
Okay.
I always wanted my creative to make sense for people, but yeah, it would not make sense of it.
You always have to think too that in this day and age, we don't like to think about this, but there are people who, whatever their first language is, don't read or don't read well.
Right.
And so your pictures can become very important in situations like that.
And so obviously some of the challenge with that when you begin to talk about imagery is we don't want to be limiting, so we begin to talk about Hispanic or even maybe Arab or other kinds of nationalities or ethnic groups, and then we say, okay, we want someone who is distinctively Hispanic looking or distinctively Arab looking, or from the Middle East. Does that then become? Are we then becoming biased? Are we then becoming unfair in stereotyping that, okay, this person looks Hispanic, so I've got to put this Hispanic-looking person in my ad, or I want an ad that's going to speak specifically to the African American or the Black community. Do I need to put dark-toned folks in there?
Yeah,
I mean,
what point does it just become pandering?
Right, exactly. So I don't know. How do you kind of straddle that line between, because frequently you will hear, particularly if you've heard a lot in the news, people will say, well, I didn't see anybody in that ad who looked like me. I didn't see anybody in an ad who I could specifically identify with. So it's a very fine line, and it's difficult to straddle. It really is. It sounds like you've done some ethnic marketing, have you?
I'm not set out with that agenda.
Okay.
But you have instances where you've got campaigns running, and maybe you're using the same messaging across the whole campaign, and in some places it doesn't perform nearly as well, and you dig around and find like, oh, this has a very high percentage of Hispanics in this area.
Mm-hmm.
That probably is a reason why my creative is resonating with them, because it's a larger percentage of Spanish-speaking population.
So what we have tried to do is to straddle the line there, is to try and have multicultural environments. So anytime we feature, when we have an image, we try and have people of multiple tonal qualities in there. Not necessarily say this person is necessarily Black or this person is necessarily Hispanic, but well, I wouldn't even say non-white, but just multiple, because I mean you can still be white, if you want to call it that, and be white or categories into the white category, but still have very dark toned skin. So I think a way to handle that is just to mix up the looks of people that you have in your imagery, and then you don't have to deal with, are they necessarily Hispanic, are they necessarily Black or whatever. We just have multiple kind of a lot of different variety in there. I think that's what diversity is about, having variety. We can speak to a lot of different people. Now there are times when I think you want to, if you're in a particularly heavily populated area, if you're talking about outdoor or other kinds of areas, where language is you want to use the language that's relevant to that particular area. But from an imagery perspective, I find if I can just put in multiple tones in there, we seem to have done okay with it. Does that make sense to you guys? Is that agreeable to you, you think? Yes? Okay. Pardon me?
It certainly has its merits.
Well, do you have concerns with it?
Well, at the same time, like a lot of people, when you're advertising, you really want to reach out with an emotional connection.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Logic and things like that. And so maybe there is a concern for how do you reconcile with your ethnic identity with what you're seeing in the image. And so like you said before, this doesn't look like me. How can, does that make it more difficult for a person to make an emotional connection with the image that they're looking at?
Well, and I think it's always important, and I'm going to talk about that later, but I think it's always important to tell a good story. And a good story told by a good storyteller really kind of, I'm going to use this word, but really kind of trumps all of this. It is if I'm telling a good story by a good storyteller, whether or not it is multicultural, whether or not it is diverse, really becomes secondary to telling that good story. And if I've told that good story and the imagery accompanies that story, I think we can really do very, very well in our advertising. Because really the goal is to try and get to that point of equality, right? Where it's not about inclusion, it's not about diversity, it's just about equality. And setting the stage and building a platform of equalness for everybody. And then we don't have to be quite so focused on a potential offense. We don't have to be quite so focused on, am I including everybody, because it's equal for everyone. So I think that's really where we want to move to. I think that's really what's important. I think that's what we need to focus on and drill down to is equality, not so much diversity, not so much inclusion, but equality. And that, in telling a good story by a good storyteller, will just naturally feed on this story makes sense for this audience, and therefore this is how I'm going to tell this story. And this is the person that makes sense to tell this story. Does that sync with you guys? Does that make sense? Yeah? So specifically for me, who am I? One of the key points was, who are you? I think before we can, as marketers, drill down into this topic for our clients, we have to understand for ourselves who we are. Relevant, maybe, maybe not. As an adoptee, a child of an adopted family, for the longest time I couldn't answer this question. Who was I? Well, you can kind of look at me and assume that I'm probably African American, black, but maybe not, you never know. But I verified that I am. So most of my family came from down here, second stage from up here, and a little bit from up there in Great Britain, okay? But now that I understand that, it kind of changed my perspective on what I do in our marketing. Who I think, I don't want to say featured, but who I think needs to be included in our marketing from an imagery perspective. Who I think I need to make sure that we address in our marketing. Because now that I understand who I am, I can make sure that that group is represented. Beforehand, it just really didn't make the kind of impact on me that it does now. So I'm not saying, I had to make sure I didn't have their logo on it. I'm not saying you need to go pick up the particular service I picked up, Ancestry, but there are a lot of them out there. But I think if you drill down into who you are and understand that, both kind of deep down and then as a marketer, I think it's going to present an opportunity for you and kind of open your, if it's not already open now, open your mind to what you can do as a marketer for your clients and just how you can participate in this conversation. Your thoughts on that?
The equality isn't just about people's ethnic heritage.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Like, I used to be frustrated because I've never been tall and I've never been thin unless I starve myself and work out several hours a day.
Okay.
And there were not, people that reflected
right.
that.
Right.
And as I've gotten older, know, for a long time in all the ads, everyone was 20 or younger, you know, and those kinds of things. And like now, I mean, it's getting better, but like, you know, I like to put fun colors in my hair sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's not just about maybe what color the person's skin is, or their even, you know, their hair or their eyes or like their heritage, where they come from. Part of who you are is also who you choose
To be, you bet. Ethnicity is just the easiest one, the easiest diversity topic to talk about, because ethnicity is where we typically go when we talk about diversity. It's typically the thing that comes to mind first. So it's, when you speak about brave conversations, it's usually the easiest door to open first and to start the conversation there. It's much more difficult for people to talk about a diversity of faith. That's probably the most difficult one to talk about. Begin to talk about diversity of lifestyle. That's equally difficult. Ethnicity is just a good place for it to start. So I throw that up there as a point of launching, a place that most of us find it easy to say, well, if I want to talk about a diversity conversation, if I want to have this conversation with somebody maybe that I'm challenged to have this conversation with, I can start there, because that's what people, when you say diversity, people are going to immediately kind of go to that spot. You're absolutely spot on target, 100%. As we said earlier, diversity encompasses everything and everybody that we are as humans, but if we don't have the conversation at all, we really haven't accomplished anything. So we have to pick a spot to start. We have to start the conversation somewhere, and that's typically the easiest place to start it. Would you agree or not? Yeah?
Well,
Go ahead.
Would you say that it's probably one of the bigger factors for inequality, whether in marketing or in the workplace or anything like that, and that's why it's a predominant focus of diversity topics?
Well, I think it's where we go for marketers. That's where we go first. When we begin to say, okay, I want to show some diversity in my advertising, I want to show some diversity in my marketing, we go to ethnicity first. We don't go to size and shape first. We don't go to those other kinds of diverse areas that are not quite as easy to show. So again, I throw that up there as a great place to start the conversation, a great place to launch off, and from there, hopefully, we can continue to go have much braver conversations into those areas that are maybe not as easy to talk about. Yes? Okay. Familiar with the term white tears? Look it up, do some research on it. It might surprise you, okay? How do you connect the dots, right? This is my little Avenger mind brain map up there that I show. So how do you connect the dots? You know, the days of kind of mainstream, traditional advertising, traditional marketing that fits all into a very nice, neat, tidy box are really gone. I mean, we really are not in that place anymore. And as marketers, we have to think about how all these different little pieces connect together to deliver the message we want. And in the context of brave conversations about diversity, inclusion, and equality, we have to pay attention to how we say, where we say it, and how frequently we put it out there. And ensure that the voice is correct, ensure that we are representing it appropriate to that audience, but also appropriate to that platform. So connecting the dots is far more important than it used to be. Far more important than probably most of us are accustomed to. And we have to really be cognizant of what we say and how we say it. Does that make sense? Yeah? Are you finding that in your marketing as you guys have? Well, you haven't done a lot, but as you prepare to do more, because you're here, you're obviously interested in this, you're interested in how you do this for your clients, how would you connect those dots and ensure that you're having the right voice? Remember, not a lecture, participation. I would submit to you that you need to prepare, documentation that this is how we say it here for this particular audience, relevant to the message we're trying to deliver, and ensure that for that audience. So if you're speaking to a particular ethnic group, or if you're speaking to someone from relevant to a lifestyle group, ask somebody who is from that particular audience that you're talking to. Does this make sense for who we're trying to speak to? Don't assume that just because you put an ad in Spanish language, it's going to communicate the same kind of message it did in a general consumer market in English. Okay, it's always a good. I think I'm probably telling you guys the things you don't always know. I mean that you already know, but it's always a good idea to do some research and ensure that what I say to that audience is relevant for them. Okay.
Don't just put your marketing message into Google Translate.
I have done that.
So bad.
And
Don't do that.
got myself in such deep trouble with that it was a bad deal. It was a very, very bad deal. And I think today, as we talk about multiple platforms here, even that I was talking about earlier about how particular, and I keep coming back to ethnic groups because that's an easy conversation. Particular ethnic groups have a tendency to use one platform over another. You may not even say it the same way on two different platforms, even directed at that particular group, because of age differences and those kinds of things. So I just say, how do you connect the dots to make sure that you pay attention to, as I put it maybe on Twitter, may not be the same way I put it on Facebook, even though I'm trying to speak to the same audience. Okay? Just pay attention to that. Why do you think some marketers are more innovative than others? I have gifts for those who answer the question.
Creativity.
Pardon me?
Creativity.
How so?
Just more creative than others.
Pass that over to him.
Think a little bit more.
More creative. How are they more creative? What do they do to make themselves more creative?
That's the second question, though, isn't it?
You don't get the prize for just being here, dude.
No, I mean, some people are just quick to come up with an idea and say, let's run with this, whereas others tend to think more analytically at it and give it more thought than others, and they think deeper.
So what drives innovation? In the context of diversity, inclusion, and equality, what drives innovation?
The very thing that you're trying to accomplish.
What do you mean?
Well, you said what drives diversity and innovation.
What drives innovation, yeah.
Yeah, well, diversity does. The more ideas I have and the more viewpoints I use, the more likely I am to come up with something.
Bang, there you go. She was listening. I didn't think she was even here when I did that earlier. There you go, thank you.
I used to be a social worker.
Oh, okay. And now she's a marketer. So as we include more voices in that conversation, it does nothing but create opportunity for varied points of view, good and bad sometimes, but still varied points of view. And as we have those varied points of view, we have far more to choose from, far more to be creative with. There's so much more to be left on the cutting room floor that we can come back to later. It just makes good sense to have all these different voices contributing to the conversation. Okay? What do you understand equality to be? So think about this in the context of these brave conversations that I want you to have. Around your water cooler, at the coffee machine, in your Sunday school class, at your bowling league. Does anybody bowl anymore? At your bocce league, that's what my daughter does, bocce league. At your axe throwing league. At what?
Pickleball.
At your pickleball league. What do you see equality to be? And yes, I know that's not a correct sentence, Eddie. I know that's not right, but yeah, you can't end in a preposition, but I know. What do we see equality to be? I heard something over here. I don't hear real well. What somebody say?
It was me muttering.
Oh, what'd you say?
No, I was challenging. Your grammar's perfectly good.
Okay.
You know, the sense I get is that what you understand equality to be is that sense of, and this is going to be redundant, treating people equally.
Okay.
It's kind of, you know, a redundant definition, which is poor style, I guess.
So treating people equally, does that mean that everybody wants to be treated the same?
Well, treating people with the sensitivity that you gain from listening.
Okay.
One of those key skills that we hope.
Yes. And I'm sorry, you were saying.
Understanding.
But there's this, and this was some kind of commercial, I think, so it's marketing. There's those things where, like, they have little kids, I think they're little kids, and they're different heights, and they're like, what is equality? And they show a thing where the kids are all different heights, but they're trying to like look over something, like a wall or something, and they all have the same size step stool to get up and peek over the wall. So that works for some of the kids, but not the other kids.
Right, because of different heights.
There's like another image, and everybody has a step stool that
Raises them to that level.
raises them to the level where
Okay.
you can look over the wall.
Okay.
And so equality can't be about treating everybody the same. It's about, I guess, giving everyone an equal opportunity.
Have we heard, of course,
Yeah,
The-
or they get to the same place.
the golden rule and or the platinum rule, treat everyone the way they want to be treated, not necessarily the way we want to treat them. So how do we get to that? How do we get to that point of understanding how someone wants to be treated? How do we get to that point of equality in their eyes? It's pretty simple. Eddie said it earlier. Pardon me?
You got to know them and have a relationship with them to be able to understand where they are.
Yes. And how does that happen? Talking to them. Having a conversation. Thank you. I heard that. Opening the door and having a brave conversation with them to understand, to begin to build a relationship, to know how they want to be treated. And as marketers, we have to do that not only with our clients / customers, but with those folks who are not our customers yet. Having the conversation to understand what's relevant, what's important, how do they want us to serve ourselves out to them, for lack of a better term. Because as we understand that, in the context of diversity and inclusion, we can present equality. And that's really what's important. So if we're prepared, if we understand understanding from their point of view, right, and we know who we are, then we can have a brave conversation about what's important to them and how to market to them. Yes? Yes, okay. So as we head into, Monday is Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, could not close out a conversation about diversity, inclusion, and equality without a quote from Dr. King, right? Have to have his insight. So he tells us that we may not have all come on the same ship, but we are all in this boat together now, right? So relevant right now, so relevant for this conversation, but just so relevant for what's going on in our world right now, okay? One of my students really kind of summed this thing up as a final note, and I'm going to read this. I tell them when I teach my students how to present, I say, don't read to your audience, because if you read to your audience, they really don't need you. They can read themselves. In most cases, they can read themselves. But I'm going to read this to you because I want to make sure, it's a quote, and I want to make sure I get it right. So one of my students said, and this is in a diversity class, and she said, to be an effective leader and adapt to these capabilities, one must be willing to understand their core and flex their bits, that's in quotes, flex their bits that they are willing to compromise. Leaders who are willing to untie their knots, knots being those places where we're unwilling to see the other point of view. So those folks who are willing to untie their knot is a leader who understands that their own culture can fully accept and fully grow into a vibrant cultural relationship and cause an opportunity for their business to grow. So I encourage you to be prepared, understanding, and what? What? Come on.
Know yourself.
Know yourself. To be able to have brave conversations with those that you engage with about diversity, inclusion, and equality. Okay, there you go. Questions? Let me know. Oh, let's go over here. I get water.
Specifically as like when you're marketing at SMU, where does truthfulness come into play? When you are, you can create a great Hispanic campaign or Latino campaign, or spiritually inclusive or sexual orientation inclusive, but then if your students come to campus and find that to be different from your marketing, where, like, how do you find the balance between diversity and truthfulness?
Wow, man, that was a loaded question. There's a lot to unpack there. Let me see if I can answer this for you. So, as an institution, we are, I'm saying this and I may be calling all you guys for jobs next week after I say this, but we're not really that diverse. And so being who I am and what I am, because I know who I am now, I challenge them to grow to what we want to be. So as we create marketing now, it's marketing about where we want to be, not where we are today. Because if I did marketing that was where we are today, no offense, guys, I love you guys, then Eddie can tell you about my wife. It's going to be a whole bunch of white folks and there won't be nobody else in it, right? But if we are to present, if we are to grow to a diverse population, we have to present that. I have to put that out there so potential students look at that and say, well, there's somebody who looks like me or there's somebody who might be me. I think that might be a spot for me. So truthfulness for us, from my perspective, from what I do, shouldn't pound on my shirt there, is about presenting where we want to be, maybe not necessarily where we are, because we know that's where we want to be. We have accepted where we are, and we know that's not where we should be. That's not where we're called to be, and we're only going to get there if we project where we want to be. Does that answer your question? Okay. Others? So when you don't have any questions, that means I just killed it. I did such a great job that you don't have any. Okay, see, I know I didn't do that job. See,
From a manager standpoint, somebody who's managing a team of people,
okay.
Instead of just making a lift session about equality mandatory for a team and saying, okay, my job's done for the year, they understand equality. What else can we do other than be reactive when something goes wrong? Like, how do you keep that going every day?
I think it's really, honestly, it's like any other thing we do in life. We talk about being lifelong learners, and that just because I cross that stage and shake the president's hand and I get my diploma, it doesn't stop there. I have to continue to feed that knowledge. I have to continue to add to that knowledge base. Same topic here. Just because I go to what is 45-minute session doesn't mean that I am now know-all and be-all from a diversity and equality and equity and inclusion kind of point of view. It's a launching off point, and I have to continue to feed that need. So more training, more research, but the biggest thing is more conversation. If we have conversation about it, we will continue to keep it kind of frontal lobe as opposed to letting it slide to the back, and we'll see those opportunities where we can be more diverse, we can be more respectful of others. So I say keep the conversation going.
I guess my question is, I had mentioned being reactive to something when something goes wrong. I mean, what does that actually look like to have a conversation? How would one bring that up in a workplace, like say a marketing agency?
I would say if we get to know the folks that we work with, right? Not make assumptions that just because somebody looks a certain way or dresses a certain way, not assume that we know them. Open the door and say, tell me about yourself. Or I think this, in a safe zone. I think this, I need to understand if that's correct about you. Do you prefer to be addressed in this way or that way? I'm trying to understand. So I think if we approach it from a point of understanding as opposed to a point of condemnation, most people are going to be willing to participate in the conversation, and then it won't be a reaction because we've already started the conversation, and it won't be reacting to something that's already happened bad. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Other questions? Once? Yes?
You looking at me?
Yep.
Yeah, all right. I am interested to know if you did the same graph as you had in the beginning about the ethnic percentages.
Percentage of spending versus percentage of population. Yes, sir.
How that would shake out in the socioeconomic diversity scales? Because my guess is we'd see a lot more inequality there.
A lot more inequality, I'll bet you would. I bet you would. Did you guys hear what he said? So if you layer on top of that spending, so the chart talked about spending, digital spending in comparison to population. So he's saying if you layer socioeconomic standing on top of that, it's going to create even wider gap between population numbers and spending numbers. And I'd be willing to bet that you're 100% correct. If you want to do that and send it to me, I'll be glad to throw it in the presentation.
On those same lines, if we have clients that have asked us to exclude certain socioeconomic regions, does that make us part of the problem? If we're not having that conversation with them? If they're looking for higher end clients, basically.
I will say it depends, because if you're selling Gulfstream 5s, you're not gonna throw that into Oklahoma City anywhere. No, you're not going to put that out there for just a general consumer market, because that's not something somebody can just, anybody walking the street can just write a check for. So yes, I think there has to be some consideration of what I'm trying to market and who I'm trying to market it to. And that's really the point, is let's make it relevant for the audience, but let's not exclude an audience based solely on our own kind of narrow perspective of what diversity looks like, because we really can't ever say who has or who hasn't, right? So I would say if a client told you that, I would say I would try and advise them that, I understand that we want to probably base this on socioeconomic scale, but not necessarily on ethnicity or locale in the country, because you really never know where money's going to come from. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Okay. Others?
If I'm understanding that correctly, like, if you want to frame it like, if I'm selling whiskey, I'm not going to go after...
I want to know you if you are.
I'm not going to go after Muslims, I'm not going to go after Mormons, not because, but that's just not my market.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go after people that have good taste in alcohol, no matter who they are.
Correct, correct. So I think, that's exactly it. The point is not to exclude a whole group of whatever. If I'm selling whiskey, I'm not gonna say, okay, I'm not gonna advertise to alternate lifestyle folks because they don't drink whiskey. Well, you don't know that. You don't know that. There are some groups of folks, Nazarenes, I'm not Nazarene, so I can say that don't drink, so it would be really kind of pointless for me to try and market to a group of folks who are clearly not my audience. And so I'm just saying, the point is to not exclude folks based on something that's not relevant to whatever your particular thing is that you're selling or that you're marketing, okay? Make sense? Yeah? Other questions or points of view? Thank you guys, I appreciate it. I'm sure they're glad you're here. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it, man. My pleasure.